Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our presentation on Tech Trends 2016, Innovating in the Digital Era, jointly hosted by Deloitte and Workday. Just one minor housekeeping item. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to enter them in the Q&A box, and we will address all questions at the end of the presentation. With us today, we have myself, Mike Stambach. I am the Director of Product Marketing from Workday. I cover all technology and analytics topics within our application suite. And Bill Briggs from Deloitte. Bill has over 17 years in the technology space. He's the CTO of Deloitte Consulting LLP, as well as the Chief Strategy Officer for Deloitte Consulting Technology. He oversees the vision for Deloitte's technology services, identifying and communicating technology trends affecting clients' businesses and shaping the strategy for Deloitte Consulting's LLP's emerging services and offerings. Bill, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Mike. Thanks. Great to be here.
So Workday and Deloitte has a pretty great partnership. We're pretty pleased to be able to do this webinar with Deloitte today. The Deloitte Workday practice has had a breadth of capabilities across a broad spectrum of HR and finance transformation services. Deloitte's assisted in numerous large global enterprises in a broad range of industries, including high technology and media, life sciences, healthcare, insurance, pharmaceuticals, higher education, and more. Our partnership spans dozens of countries in multiple languages and draws upon specific regional and local country subject matter experts from their global practices. We're very pleased to have Bill with us today to discuss the recent Deloitte Tech Trends study, which covers key trends that we believe are critical to IT and finance organizations to address this digital disruption that we're all facing. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Bill.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Mike. And it's great to be here and especially with Workday talking through what's changing in this, and what I like to start with in Tech Trends, and for the audience, I'll apologize in advance, this will be a bit of speed dating. We really would like to get some questions and interaction with the audience as we go, but there's a lot to cover, and that was by design. So I hope you're seated and ready to go through a whole lot. I use this slide with executive teams all the time, and it's really just to put the technology, the change we're seeing in and across information technology at the top left in a bit of context. And what we try to do with Tech Trends, a couple things. One is looking out across all domains, and it tries to have an 18 to 24-month view on what's coming and shift the discussion from the what of individual technology advances into the so what or the why you should care as finance leaders and IT executive or the broader business executive. And so when we talk about the so what and the why, we quickly shift from just the individual technology domains in the top left and some of the applied technology domains that are coming that are more in the realm of science. We call them exponentials. So moving out of just digital and cloud and analytics, cyber into things like AI and robotics and synthetic biology, nanotech, and the like. The middle of this is really the key, which is how do we put it in terms of how industries are being reshaped, new roles, new boundaries between sectors, changing customer engagement patterns, and changing definitions of even who your customers are, changing, basically reimagining how work gets done across function within the organization. So the employee empowerment piece of this and how that's really changing. And then, broad globalization, competitive dynamics. And the right-hand side sometimes gets left behind, and we think essential to the discussion. How do we put risk, which could be cyber, security, privacy, regulatory compliance, and we'll introduce the idea that maybe there's even a broader definition of risk, which includes the ethics and morality, the responsibility behind technology adoption. How do those all become part of not just the compliance-related activity we have to worry about down the line, but it actually is at the heart of how we think about driving innovation and growth. And so this is really just meant to show, one, let's recognize we are in a tremendous time. I like to say every company is a technology company at its core, but that's really from all of these factors, how work gets done, how we think about customers, engage with customers, and even the very foundation of our business model. and how we compete. So that's literally just exposition. This next slide is near and dear to my heart, as I've owned our tech trends for 7 years. It's the trending of the trends, and what it's grouped by. There won't be a quiz at the end, we promise. But what I like about it is it uses those big buckets that were on the top left of the previous slide. What I affectionately call the 5 forces: the digital, cloud, analytics, this core renaissance, core modernization thrust, the business of IT, which is as much about infrastructure as rethinking the IT department and how it is operating, how it delivers, how it's organized. And then we put cyber as basically a bonus thread. Every one of the chapters that we'll go through, every one of the topics actually has a cyber implication baked into it. And again, to the previous comment, it's because it's so central to even defining strategy and vision. It needs to be a discipline that we think about all throughout the life cycle of any given initiative. So it's being treated as not a separate topic, but actually at the heart of what all of these things mean to your business. So this is, and it forms a bit of a maturity curve. We try to do the 18 to 24 month view. The future's easy to predict. The timing of the future's harder. So if anything, some of these we wrote about earlier, and they're still hitting mass adoption now. But this is a bit of memory lane for me, and if any topic in this list is interesting, we've got all of the past research published as well. So enough of setup. Let's get in, since we don't have a lot of time. What we're going to try to do is basically do a slide for each one. We already picked a few we'll dig deeper into because we thought this audience, it would particularly resonate. We're going to try to do a flyby across all of the 8 trends that we featured this year. Okay, so the first one is one of the most important ones, and we affectionately call it Right Speed IT. Every year historically, we've had the first tech trend be focused on the role of the CIO and how that's been evolving and elevating. And we use a construct we call the 4 faces of the CIO to talk about different responsibilities as an operator, as a technologist, as being the design authority for all the technology implications existing and future. And then 2 that get some attention, but they aren't typically talked about in concrete terms. The strategist, which is basically co-creating with the business, helping drive real value in and around the business and functional strategies. And then the catalyst, which is not a seat at the table and not a trusted advisor, but really the individual driving transformation in innovation and change. I used to have a picture of William Wallace from Braveheart here because I liked the call to arms type of image it brought to mind. But early on, someone reminded me it doesn't end well for Braveheart, so we shifted away from that imagery. But it's really the difference between kind of a passive participant to the person driving and organizing that change. That's true. That whole evolution. When the analysts point to the CIO and say she or he is headed to become the commodity of the chief electricity officer, chief data center officer, I think it's a shame because there is so much at the heart of how every company, every government agency is having to think about tomorrow. Technology is fueling that, and who better than the technology executive to help kind of paint the picture of what tomorrow should look like, but also get there from the realities of today, which is a really important part of that dialogue. So we actually published a global CIO survey that breaks down different archetypes of CIOs, and there's no judgment between one's better than the other, but it's basically, one, can you recognize which pattern that you fall in or that in your organization your CIO falls in? And then 2, the more important question of, is that the right archetype or pattern for your organization in your industry at this time? And if not, some prescription of potentially how to elevate, which is as much about personal skills, capabilities of the leader, and probably more importantly, the capabilities of the organization at large. And so this trend is focused more on that last point, which is not the role of the IT executive, which is changing and an important part of the narrative, but it's now how does the IT department have to change to basically be ready to capture this pretty unique and singular opportunity we have around us of what technology means to our organizations and our markets. And so Right Speed IT, it's trying to evolve. There's been a good dialogue that some have started in the last few years around a bimodal or a 2-speed model, which is trying to put some extremes into focus. And it's great for conceptually starting an argument of, one side is legacy, enterprise class, many stage gates, focused on predictability, reliability, scale, high torque, but probably costly and slow. And the other side of it, we have digital innovation, experimentation, cloud, rapid analytics, and things that typically are the top of our strategic priority list. And the danger becomes when we say that those two extremes, that never the twain shall meet, or that it's no man's land in between. Because for almost all of my clients, the majority of their focus is stuck directly in that transmission between. We know we have places where we need high speed to drive new capabilities that in some ways we're really going down completely new and bold paths, products and services and offerings and process capabilities. But so many of those have deep dependencies back into my core. And so, and we see this with Workday as we implement when it's true transformational scale. There are a lot of dependencies that bring different pieces of the back and mid office into what we think about HR, when we think about finance, how it feeds into the broader digital, customer-facing, analytics, whatever they might be. And so what Brightspeed IT is trying to put some light to is the only right speed for IT is faster, no matter who you are and where you compete, geography or industry. IT could and should go faster than it does today. To do that, you need to start breaking down all the core capabilities, all the services. How does IT deliver and operate all of those into a continuum to allow every one of the pieces of what makes the business of IT tick? How do we let those go faster and scale appropriately given the bounds of a given project or initiative? So that was a mouthful, I know. Let me try to make it more real. We have to think about requirements management and how do we automate requirements management and integrate it in a way so it doesn't become a burden, but it doesn't give us away from the responsibility to think about and document what we're trying to do. Think about release management and push to more frequent releases, which when we have cloud-based solutions, part of that solve for us, but the dependencies of what that plays into in the broader solution landscape, how do we have that be operating at a faster speed? How do we think about deployment? How do we think about testing and automating pieces of testing? How do we think about system maintenance and monitoring? And on and on and on, the core things that IT has to do. And by the way, besides the delivery, the delivery methodology, development methodology, let's take a step back and think about how we prioritize and budget. How do we do procurement? How do we actually go through vendor selections and certifications? How do we manage IT finance? There's all kinds of things that have been set up for the one speed only model, which is closer to that legacy enterprise scale, enterprise speed than the other end of the continuum. But recognize that almost everything we do is going to have pieces of both extreme necessarily is a part of the answer. But how do we build an IT organization that can operate that can span across them? Which, by the way, a big part of this, there's tooling, and we'll talk about autonomics later. A big part of this is culture. It's skills that we need to bring in that maybe we didn't have before, we didn't have a scale before. And it's as much into the business of how the business is participating in a retooled IT delivery model as is about how IT is retooling to interact with the business in a different way. And there's a slide here that just has some of the pieces kind of baked into it. And again, the org considerations are just as, if not the most important piece of this puzzle. Mike, I know when we first talked about doing this webinar, this was the first one I think you circled, because it's at the heart of, even if you have world-class new solutions that are unlocking capabilities that never were there before, it can only go as fast and it can only be as effective as the organization is ready to match the cadence, right, and match that potential. And
yeah,
this is one that's just with every one of my
clients. To that point, I was just curious if there were any large enterprises that you know of that have gone down this path before, and what was the impact they had to their organization?
Yeah, no, I mean, and people sometimes think that this is the, great, but not for us because we are a Fortune 100, Fortune 500. And this is only for the realm of the startups. I mean, we're seeing some of the biggest companies in the world take this on. So one of the biggest automotive manufacturers, if you grab the report, there's actual named client examples that I can't name on the call, but you can actually see them in the report. And talking about the journey they've been on, as they shift from making cars and trucks to thinking about their business is based on mobility. Mobility has a lot of different flavors that technology is at the heart of. Not drive chains and chassis, but actual digital solutions and IT, the heart of what that means. So thinking about how do we look at our portfolio of projects and not let it be an agile versus waterfall discussion, and not let it be a digital versus legacy discussion, but allow us to appropriately scope a project and deliver it as fast as we can, but dispositioned by risk profile and not some of those more artificial things that typically get the attention here. By the way, agile transformation is fantastic, but we can do it in legacy environments as well. And just because it's waterfall doesn't mean it can't be strategic and iterative in the way we approach it. This sometimes becomes holy religious wars. But they've seen it. A high-tech company has been on this journey, and they've seen not only 20x number of releases they're able to support a year and 60% efficiency gains in productivity of IT and the amount of things that they can push through. But it's become a part of and creating a new, and I'm going to play on the word legacy for a second, creating a new legacy, a new reputation for IT in the organization, where they're actually being seen as the strategic partner and actually a part of driving product strategy instead of being almost a third-party vendor that you're begrudgingly calling in because you have to. So this is one I think everyone needs to think about. If you haven't thought about your IT department, one, there's likely efficiencies to be gained to rethink how the work is delivered, and we'll talk about some tooling later that can help make that real. But also, when you think about the value that IT is delivering, how much of your IT spend is actually directly affecting customer, or fill in the blank for your core strategy. That's product expansion and growth, or whatever it is. How much of it is that? And if we go down the right speed, not only are we going faster, but hopefully we have more line of sight of exactly how that spend is making a real difference. But I love this, and there's so much detail behind it to make it real. The danger of this one is it can feel like rhetoric. It's absolutely not rhetoric. There's a lot of depth behind how to make this happen. And unfortunately, that's what speed dating feels like as we do each one. Should we go to the next slide? Mike, what do you think?
Yeah.
Okay. So on a bit of a different note, augmented reality, virtual reality, getting a ton of attention right now, mostly because in the consumer realm we're seeing a whole host of devices being released. There was a conference yesterday that this is one of the topics that dominated one of the leading high-tech players. We're seeing almost every manufacturer get into this game. In augmented reality, it could be the thing people naturally think about, smart glasses, looking through and having digital information added as context to what you're seeing in the real world around you. But it could also be beacons, and we'll talk about IoT, but having environments, they're giving us information and participating to augment our experience, to augment what we know about operations. Either side of that could be this. And then virtual reality, which is much more immersive. We're creating a simulated environment that's either replicating the real world or is creating something that wouldn't be feasible in the real world, and allowing us to engage in it in a very immersive way. And for both, the consumer application is very interesting, but it's going to take time because there's so many players. We're in the earliest days of the devices themselves. It's a wide range of price points to move into the space. A lot of them either tether and require an HDMI hookup into a desktop, or they're battery powered and they're either lower definition or the battery life is an issue. So there's a lot of reasons why in the consumer side it's going to take some time, but it's coming. And so it's not that poo-poo over time. AR and VR are going to have a very real impact to most of our worlds and lives. It will, but it's not the same story like smartphone and tablet adoption, where the consumerization push brought in enterprise at mass. What we're predicting is actually the enterprise adoption patterns are going to be the fastest in the next few years that will drive the broader market. And so in that, part of it's because I don't have to worry about the ecosystem to settle down and oligopoly of a couple of winners to emerge before I will see it get adopted at scale. With the enterprise play, for sure we want to be monitoring to make the right bets on winners, but as long as we can justify an initial business case within pretty bounded scope, I can justify the spend investment in the device, knowing that it's going to evolve and the category is going to continue to emerge, and that's okay. The second piece is that there are very, very well-defined places where we're seeing companies invest and getting real value out of it today. And it doesn't have to be multi-purpose, general purpose. It can be very, very specialized for a specific scope. So four big buckets of investment we're seeing. The first is largely education, training, simulation. And it could be VR, it could be AR. Where there's a cover story about what NASA's doing with the space station. They have astronauts ready to go up and be effective when they land by doing experiments on the ground. And flip it, they're doing things up to capture the environment so that they can better train future astronauts through. Fascinating. Industrial product companies are using it to train service technicians, allow them to go through a bunch of different scenarios that would be very expensive, if not impossible, to replicate in a lab or in a training facility, and allows us to get past some very real safety issues potentially. We're actually, Mike, I don't know if I told you this story before, but we're actually doing one. So Deloitte's doing, for our senior managers that are going up through the promotion process, they have to give value proposition to be a partner or director in the firm, and it requires a high level of executive presence that, depending on the individual, they might need some coaching of just effective presentation delivery and presence in a boardroom. So it's a virtual reality simulated in one of our boardrooms and allow them to go and learn good presentation skills without having to have an executive coach deployed for every one of them. And so it's a really interesting education scenarios, training scenarios, which is the first big bucket. Second big bucket, all around communication, productivity, and collaboration. So a few large consumer products companies, industrial products companies are using virtual R&D spaces to allow teams across globes, across function, to not just have a more immersive video presence, telepresence, but actually be working in a simulated space on the same objects together in real time. So that could be a model in the product life cycle where they're actually collaboratively able to see what the others are looking at, seeing, and make modifications on the fly that others can see. So it creates that very immersive and very effective environment to work together with, which is fascinating. Third one, customer service, field service, more AR than VR, but having the ability for someone to see what you're seeing out in the field and guide you through making a repair or making a sale. Either job aids available to you on the fly, or literally someone giving you expert advice and support when you need it, hands-free, heads up in the moment. And then the last is experiential marketing, which we're seeing more and more of. Find a way to make it more immersive, more effective to sell to. So those are the first four, more coming. It's real. This is one that might seem like a very shiny object. There's real business cases being developed. There's real prototypes being unraveled. And the reason why I'm helping a lot of folks start on this now is it's going to take time to learn a brand new design language of how to effectively create experiences using these technologies. So just like the leap from a relatively immobile desktop, laptop, browser experience, the change we've seen going to smartphones and tablets, just what the experience was, the expectation was, what made usable, simple, engaging design work. We're moving into that same type of realm now with AR and VR. And it's, instead of point, click, type, we went to touch, swipe, and talk. Now we're into gaze and blink and gesture, and even contextually just be. So it's a fascinating space. And it's just one for us to think about. Does the future of finance happen in a virtual world? I don't know, but maybe. There could be interesting things even within some of the traditional functions where this could have a real impact. Mike, thoughts on this one, or should we go on to the next?
Well, this one's, when I read your report, this one was one of the more fascinating ones to me, but you already answered all my questions. I was going to ask you about use cases, but you just covered the big 4 buckets, so let's go on to the next one.
Well, there you go. I mean, this one, if anything, if anyone hasn't tried, even there's very simple models that use a smartphone to basically be the display. It is something that to be told what this represents doesn't do it justice. Have your vendor partners come in. If you're a customer of Deloitte and Workday, how about us come in to help show you what some of this actually is? Because it requires that experience to really light the imagination of what this could possibly do. And it moves it from a transaction into a true experience, which is something that's you truly have to see it to experience it. So, okay, let's do it. And I mentioned IoT, and this is a very important one, and it's been around for a while. In fact, our Trending the Trends had Internet of Things like topic with our very first report back in 2010. And if anything, the adoption has taken slower, but the impact of what this means has actually gotten bigger than what we thought it would be 7 years ago. So the shorthand is, and it's become very hyped, so I'm sure most of the audience has been exposed to IoT before. Sensors are gaining performance at cost, at size levels to be able to conceptually have them everywhere, everything around us, have some intelligence and connectivity baked into it. We're in the period with IoT like we were in the period of analytics and data 5 years ago when big data came about and became this overwhelming concept that caused a lot of distraction and noise. And IoT right now is in that swirl path because there's so much potentially out there that might matter. And you see the tagline of the Internet of Everything that goes around. And it's true, everything around us potentially could participate in having information available or potentially being able to be automated in a way it wasn't before. But we've got to shift it from, it's not the grand unified theory of everything that possibly we could imagine. We've got to get it into some very bounded use cases and start driving, making this real. And typically, the more constrained we can make it up front with the more purposeful outcome behind it, the more effective the experiment is that kind of drives the potential and allows you to grow and scale and ambition. So part of this is to talk about, for sure, the what of the enablement, sensors, communication gear, really lightweight CPU on a chip, being able to be deployed. That's all part of the story and important. In that is that you probably have many, many sensors that you've deployed, regardless of industry. There's probably a lot of smarts out that's sitting dormant today because we didn't know what to do with the data. So either it doesn't go anywhere or just goes somewhere that's effectively a dev null bucket that you're not capturing and trading on in any way. So this isn't just greenfield, it's some brownfield as well. What do you do with your existing places? We got to shift it into those, what are some concrete business cases we can say, because we have visibility, we can do something different. And not just visibility in the passive sense of sensing, which is the kicker here, from sensing to doing. It's the what do we actually, how do we harness the signals we get out of the intelligent devices and sensors around us to truly either automate a business process to run a different way, or put information in the hand of an individual so they make a different decision they otherwise would, or take action to do something they otherwise wouldn't. So with an oil and gas company, traditionally there's so many wellheads they have to manage that if something happens to disrupt the flow out of any individual well, or if there's an issue that they see in the field, there's a standard protocol they use to best guess what the right resolution path would be. With Internet of Things, potentially, not only do you have visibility in the flow out of every individual well, but you have pressure and temperature and how it's changed, and latent heat around, and very much all kinds of things that could be a part of what you're tracking. And you can actually have intelligence built into the wellhead or into the actual pipeline that knows to automatically take action because this combination of signals has been detected, and it translates into this event that we know surety we should do something about. And so it's this shifting from, hey, let's just look at this as we get information, into this is a way we can use digital to rethink core parts of our business. Or we can use it to embed it in products to actually evolve our business model, which we're seeing a lot of companies do as they shift from selling aircraft engines into trying to sell thrust. Well, that's being predicated by information coming out of the product itself that allows them to sign up for a level of performance and basically take on predictive maintenance and things. So this is a heady one. And the danger becomes when it's an IoT initiative, it's almost always by definition a very modestly scoped, not very business-driven science fair project. When it becomes these bounded, how do we actually apply this to a specific problem like facility asset efficiency? Our buildings, and how do we manage HVAC and lighting and flow in a building? That's interesting. The Intranet of Things, how do we apply this to make a difference? Or driving fuel efficiency of a fleet, and we have visibility into the actual performance of individual vehicles. That's interesting. We can go forward. So this is great. And by the way, this one is one that requires deep hooks, most likely, into a lot of the core systems around us. So for sure, HR and finance are part of that discussion of how does having that information ready to participate with this IoT-enabled world around us allow us to do really bold and interesting things. So don't let this one just be a shiny object is the takeaway. And if sensing from doing is about analytics to action, there's also from talking to doing, which is this is one that you can spend a lot of energy just spinning wheels around. It's better to get started and try to find ways to make it real. Mike, thoughts?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about an automobile manufacturer that was moving. They're less concerned about cars and trucks now and more towards mobility, and they use Internet of Things as sort of a driver for that. I mean, what was the connection there?
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it is if you look at over time, instead of potentially selling you a car, they're selling you transportation services. Suddenly, what you're seeing a lot of investment around autonomous vehicles and it shifts into robotics. A lot of that's being enabled by I need to understand where cars are. I need to be put in control systems to allow them to run and give me feedback. It's really fascinating as you look at if you have a bold vision or if into the car sharing business. A lot of that is, do you know where they are? Can you enable them to be unlocked and given access to with credentials and used, but track where they've gone, how far they've gone, and have that participate with some pretty advanced business functions like metering usage and billing based on usage. And these are some of the advanced states that the named client in the report is not exactly a part of all of their strategy, but the others are playing down that same path. And so it quickly moves it from, well, that's interesting, this is RFID on steroids, into something much more profound, potentially. Okay. Spirit time, burned through a good chunk of and we're not even halfway through. This one is at the heart of I think the core technology strategy of all of you, we have invested a lot historically in core systems to drive all of our back mid front office. And there is a interesting time we're in now of how do we rethink, how do we reimagine our core? And that's as much about recognizing the needs of most businesses are fundamentally changing because of this broader technology landscape and customer expectations and globalization and industry boundaries starting to blend. There's a point in time where we're in now of, one, how do we have a vision for what our business needs across our core, what we would have historically called our core business processes? And do we know what capabilities we need, not constrained by what we have today from the systems and solutions we've built up over time, but what being competitive, being a leader, being strategic, what it means and where we have to get to. And then we have a responsibility to look at all of our existing assets that we have and recognize that if we can revitalize, if we can actually get more value out of some of the assets, that should be something we try to do. But we also can't be beholden to the things we've invested in historically if they're not strategic anymore, or if there's a better answer that can meet the needs in a different way. That should be something we're actively considering. So reimagining core systems, it might seem ironic that given this webinar, part of this message is that legacy isn't a four-letter word. And just because it's old and has been in place for a while doesn't necessarily make it bad. But the flip side is we have to be surgical in saying where are there pieces of our portfolio, of our solutions that we've deployed, where they need an upgrade, and where are there capabilities that we need now as a business that we didn't need before, and be especially critical in how best we can serve those, given all the options available to us today. So this one, it's certainly an application-heavy lens, and I think we're moving to this hyper-hybrid world of a lot of different players needed to come together to meet any business's needs for tomorrow. And it's a way to make sense of, the biggest packages in the world have spent a lot of money upgrading their core engine. And there's places where that makes absolute sense and can be helpful. But typically it's not the technology features that matter. It's going to be the business capabilities that they unlock. Just the same, we see new entrants that are absolutely strategic, that are offering cloud-based solutions for very specialized parts of your business, where if we can tap into those in a way, we should be thinking about it and trying to make that real. So out of this, there becomes, integration and design become core tenets that IT needs, back to the Rightspeed IT. And it also has us take a fresh lens of kind of what is core to our business from a business lens back, and then how do we best put together a collection of IT solutions to meet that need, and be very deliberate about what's strategic and differentiated and what's not. And so these are my 5 R's. These are our 5 R's we like to use. They're easy to remember, and they're actually pretty indicative of a lot of the different things that typically come into play when we talk about modernization. One is replatforming, which sometimes it's because of we have to shift off of a legacy environment because we've got brain drain of talent that we're losing, expensive to retool. And it's amazing how I think the 2 hottest jobs that start with a C, one of them is coopering, which, Mike, you don't know this, but I'm from Kentucky originally, and I'm a big whiskey fan. And there's an absolute shortage on barrels because of all of the global demand on bourbon and scotch. So coopering is one of the top jobs you can have, and the second is COBOL, because there's such a demand for COBOL talent that's retiring out or worse, and still so much of our existing legacy systems depend on it. And so replatforming might be strategic to in front of that issue and migrate from a legacy environment onto a modern Java and object-oriented language. Replatform also could be an infrastructure play, that we want to rationalize and consolidate our infrastructure and move it across and unlock something compelling. So replatform is interesting and comes in. Remediate is potentially, because we've done finance transformation and we have new tools and processes, and we need those hooks to play nicely with the rest of the back and mid office. We have to go in and do some open heart surgery to allow our extended core to play. So it could be enabling interfaces in a graceful way, services lens, an API economy, making that real. It could be data and rationalizing master data. It could be a lot of things that go into remediate. It could just be we've got technical debt we want to remove, so we're going to go inside and try to pay it down. But it's important because it plays into the next two almost always. Revitalize is where the back office, the transactions and systems are actually pretty sound, and it becomes we have to address usability as an issue, which might lead us to replatforming or might lead us to replacement. But the real issue is usability, or the real issue is insight and analytics. So how do we actually create new capabilities, new solutions and services to bring that to light, which may be on top of our existing legacy or may be a part of the next one, which is replace, which is literally I'm going to take something that was a custom solution, I'm going to take something that was a package, take something that was an early adopter in a cloud service, I'm going to move it to something else, which could be and typically is, cloud is a place we start, but also it could be what was a package we want to make custom, what was custom we want to make a service from a cloud provider or a package. But basically replacing out the definition of core and how it's being met. And then the last one is sometimes gets a chuckle, but retrench is do nothing, which can be absolutely strategic if it's deliberately undertaken. And likely it's not the answer for all of the technology footprint, but for a piece of it, the answer might be let's look in places that have much more of an immediate and impactful business so what. So these aren't meant to be mutually exclusive, and almost always, in fact, almost all of our implementations with Workday is a combination of these that go into an extended stack and how we get it to be modernized and participate with a reimagined finance process or HR process. And it is all about how do we do this iteratively, how do we do this deliberately over time, and use these techniques together so we're not driving just-in-case transformation of our core, which is a really awful way to try to get a big IT investment justified. But it's very much business-driven and very surgical and precision of how we apply these. And Mike, you've seen this. I mean, we've done this together many times. Different pieces of these have come into play. Maybe not as poetically named, but it seemed like this resonated with you.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the areas you mentioned around usability, that tends to be a big, strong driver for us into why organizations are looking at something like Workday, because the systems of the old are just not usable anymore. But we also see, not so much with the HCM systems, but on the finance side, there's a large risk component associated with it. So one of my questions was, what are the key areas that organizations should really kind of focus on? What are the low-hanging fruit for reimagining the core that maybe they don't see as big of a risk, or what's the way you could minimize or mitigate that risk when you're trying to go through an effort like this?
Yeah, and part of it is, I think historically we've always thought of it as an all or nothing. Any given system for given functionality, and the nice thing is we've got techniques now that can allow us to carve out pieces of scope and functionality, and either to drive waves of it's a replacement where we're putting in a net new that's taking over a lot of that scope, but able to do that in a much more controlled way, which is fantastic. The other piece is, I think there's acknowledgement of when we say risk, there was some bias about my legacy existing may not be nimble and may not be usable, but it's mine, I own it, I built it, or I implemented it a long time ago. It's a known commodity, and so by definition, it's less risky, it's more secure than an alternative. And then, especially when you start a few years ago, and looking at the cloud as an alternative, especially in places like financials, heart of the business, core system, core process, then that was an argument we saw a lot. And I think what we've seen enough proven early adopters that have shown the power of the model. I think there's just more understanding of what it is, some of the limitations and risks that were inherent in what you had. It doesn't mean that's not a conversation. It still is and should be. But there is an assumption of why not, why it won't work before, and I think we've moved it to a different conversation now. It has to be talked about, thought through very, very much for every client in their industry and their geography. But there isn't that blanket assumption that it's the wrong answer. It's no longer the why. It's the when and
why
how.
not?
Yeah, exactly. So, okay. So, as I put myself in a corner here, I want to go through two of them relatively quickly and spend a little bit more time on the third. So, autonomic platforms is almost the enablement layer behind Lightspeed IT. And if there's two things that come out of this, one of them is that infrastructure modernization can be just as important as the application modernization. And part of why a cloud migration makes sense on the application side for a lot of organizations is it actually helps you simplify and modernize the underlying infrastructure as much as about the new capabilities that it's delivering from a business or a function or a process. So part of this is, we want to be moving toward more virtualized infrastructure, which could be servers and storage and networks and data centers. We want to use containers to allow things to move between where they're being deployed. And ultimately what we want is to allow software-defined everything be the mantra. And when we go to cloud, that actually is a part of what we get from moving to the cloud. As we're consuming high-order services, what's being done underneath are effectively virtual resources for us to manage. And as much as there's a huge capital expense, we continue to build out large footprints of technical compute infrastructure, and there's a labor element to maintain that. So, whether or not it involves a move to the cloud, there's a wave of modernization at the lowest level, infrastructure, data center, that's important. And the flip side of it is we also want to get to laborless IT in ways that we haven't been able to before. And so when we think about the Lightspeed IT, we kind of broke down some of the key capabilities, services that IT departments need to deliver. If you look at things like DevOps, the stated mission is how do we align priorities, how do we automate different pieces of that life cycle, environment management, provisioning, requirements management, testing, deployment, release management, all the things I rattled off before. But the goal should be not just can I automate the management of the workload. So I've got a workflow tool that lets me effectively route issues to the right database administrator. I actually want to move more and more to automating the workload. So the request coming in, I could have a virtual database administrator potentially that's taking action without having to have human intervention, which is a much lower price point even more than the most aggressively contracted outsourcing arrangement would be. And so the software-defined everything quickly extends well beyond just the technology stack into potentially the supporting IT, delivering operating model. And if you haven't heard of robotics process automation, RPA is a term, that's absolutely what this represents. And it moves up into, and we talk about HR and finance processes, there's this interesting combination of this next generation of the engines to drive a much better experience and much more strategic process. There's also the incorporation of some of these other capabilities, cognitive agents that can participate in that lens as we reimagine finance or reimagine HR and talent. So I love this one. I don't want to give it short shrift, but we wanted to focus on analytics. But this one, we can look at it just within IT, software-defined everything within IT, including laborless IT. And it gives us a ... into software-defined ops, business ops, not just IT ops. So, Mike, this could probably be an entire webinar for another day to dig into this one and give it its due. But
Yeah, that's what I was
we
thinking.
Move on to,
we're starting to get a little short on time, so I'll
I know,
let you keep going.
And this is, these four kind of are nice because they make some of those points just have some data behind it. I think this is a place that our collaboration together in really bringing these to light in that future of the core functions that we represent. How do these actually play into what our most ambitious clients and customers should be thinking about as we help them down the journey tomorrow. So I'll do, so I want to give some time for questions from the audience and a little dialogue. So I will try to do these three in speed dating form just so that you know they're there and can dig in. Blockchain, if there's any takeaway, much more than just Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Anything that can be represented as a digital asset, a blockchain could be an interesting disintermediator of who controls trust for that asset. So cryptocurrency is looking at banking and governments, saying, could we use a different way to represent ownership and transfer of ownership? We're seeing it in healthcare, life sciences, with electronic medical records, with customer loyalty, customer information across consumer products and services. Seeing governments look into blockchain as a new way to talk about voting rights and land rights and things. At the end of the day, it's the protocol that matters. And just think about what the web, the protocol of the Internet of Communication that was HTTP and TCP/IP, the underlying protocol allowed the Internet for communication to happen 20 plus years ago. What we're seeing is this is potentially the protocol, the Internet of value, the Internet of trust, and this is one that has far-reaching potential implications. It doesn't mean that financial institutions go away. It doesn't mean that corporations, we know them, go away. It doesn't mean the government goes away. But it is an interesting new way that instead of having to rely on institutions to certify and manage transactions and contracts and ownership, it's suddenly potentially shifting to peer-based, distributed, computer science-backed, cryptographically driven new world. And that's another teaser. There's a good 8 pages in the report on this. We just did a webinar a few months ago. If anyone's interested, we can send out information digging into this topic alone for about an hour because it's heady. But the takeaway should be, don't just look at blockchain and dismiss it as it only matters if I'm in FSI or banking or in payments. It's a lot bigger and potentially more profound than that. But we are very much in the early innings. Industrialized analytics, core to, I think, all of what Workday, Deloitte do together. How do we untap information, turn insights into action? This one's all about doing that in a much more systemic and repeatable way that becomes a backbone, a discipline, a mindset inside an organization. So there's tooling and platforms of this. There's a lot more around setting up a team of people that can do this, incentives out into the line, into the business. And so industrialize is not meant to be just at low-cost factory scale, but it's certainly meant to say too much of what we see big companies do with data is one-off, is transactional. It's a study, not a systemic investment. And a lot of times it's chasing some shiny objects like new techniques, which the new techniques are powerful. And this isn't meant to say cognitive analytics, machine learning, pieces of AI and natural language processing and dark analytics on images and video and audio. All of those are really fascinating new clubs in our bag, if you want to use a golfing metaphor. But we need to create the core capabilities, which is master data, platform elements, the process of governance, be able to harness those to turn them into, we're chasing what can we do with machine learning to, we've unearthed the most important questions that parts of our business have, or things that we don't know that if we knew we could actually run our business differently or compete differently, and how do we turn that into action. So this one, again, is a heady one, a lot in it. And the last one, it really is that we started with risk, thinking beyond security, privacy, regulatory compliance, and moving it into what the ethics and morality, responsibility of some of these advanced technologies, and how can that be a part of our legacy in thinking about not that we don't take action, but we take action and think about how do we mitigate some of the risks that this might have to our people, to our communities, to society at large. The flip side of it is, can we actually apply these technologies to solve some of the world's biggest problems? And we think the answer is yes. And we have some great examples of companies doing just that, shifting their charitable spend from financial contribution to R&D-like research to advance civil concerns or economic concerns or health concerns. So I'll take a breath, Mike. That was, we promised speed dating. I think we delivered on that promise of a mile a minute. But
we still have a few minutes for questions and answers. So if you do have a question, please enter it into the Q&A box on your console, and we'll get to it. So, Bill, one of the first questions that came in is, what are the first steps that CIOs and CFOs can take towards adopting some of these trends to drive their business?
Yeah, I think partly is, I was with a client workshop yesterday, and we went through these, and the recognition of there's so much here, and this is only a microcosm of all the change that's out there. It becomes, how do we set priorities and make this attainable? And I think the order we went through them, there will be constantly new things like blockchain and AR and VR and IoT that matter. And it's how do we build an IT department? And this is, we can start it with the right speed on the skills that we have at scale, the way we operate and deliver and interact with the business, the way we think about shaping and scaling new solutions. Like, that needs to be fundamentally overhauled in most shops. And with that modernization story, you could actually line up autonomics at the bottom, and reimagine the core in the middle, and the data one on top of it, and say, that's basically your IT stack. And as we think about adding new skill sets, adding new types of people, rewiring how IT kind of thinks about, delivers the business of IT. How do we make a roadmap of the places we need to invest in the foundation of the core infrastructure, apps, and data to be ready to do all of these more bold and ambitious things that some of the other topics represent? So if anything, it's instead of chasing the shiny object, which is someone that puts out a tech trends report every year, I recognize I'm part of the problem of just constantly shifting attention to the next shiny object. There's this, can we put that core stack in place that's ready to be the foundation for strategic growth? Do that in a way that's not a $500 million transformation initiative that gets you fired as you try to bring it up to the CEO or the board. And then be very pragmatic in how do we start small. I always attribute it to Stephen Gillette. He used to be a lot of places, but the think big, start small. If we're going to fail, let's fail fast, and let's scale soon. And we're going to learn always through it. There's a way to break this stuff down into a way that makes sense, and also give you a strategy so that it's not just we're being responsive to whatever's capturing the attention in that parade of interesting new ideas, but we're building up the ability to respond to whatever new ideas come next.
I just have, looks like I just have one more question. Should have some time for that. In regards to the reimagining core systems, can you talk to an example where someone has made this overhaul and what benefits they drew from the process?
Yeah, in fact, and there's a question I see in here about the report. I mentioned the report a couple times. If you just Google Deloitte Tech Trends, it'll bring you to the landing page. You can get the full 135-page report. There's actually an iPad app. You can get the snackable version if you want. And if you want, we can actually just reply out to everyone that joined and give them the links directly too. But in that, we have 4 examples for every chapter, and we also include one external executive's perspective on it as well. So there's a lot of good real examples. One of them is for one of the bigger kind of government agencies and how we're helping them drive digital experience. I can't say a lot because there's only one of them, and it'd be very transparent who it is. But think about it as a digital customer experience that plays into all their customer-facing operations. We're building up brand new cloud-based architecture to support the next generation experience on that, but we're also modernizing their core, which is actually older than the agency itself, the legacy system that's driving all the underlying transactional logic, customer logic, product logic, and we're doing it by basically exposing the core services as APIs and a cloud-based integration platform, creating architecture and governance for master data and sharing of those services and of the underlying entities that matter. And it's being adopted not just for the digital platform now, it's actually for the entire legacy stack, where they're seeing it have high percentage increase in projects effectiveness because so much of what their individual spend is around integration and managing the technical data of the legacy services. So it's a great one. If you look in there, it's one of the first ones that bring it to life, and I mean truly transformative. Yeah.
All right, well, I think with that, we're at the end of our time. So, Bill, I want to thank you for your time and walking us through all those trends. For all the attendees, you will get a copy of the Tech Trends report as well as the webinar replay within the next week. So look for that in your email. With that, we'll close it, and thank you for attending.
Thanks, everybody.